So I mentioned in a previous video how I finally read for the first time this year Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. Famously, a really complex and dense series of books that really demands a lot of its reader, not just on its first read, but it even demands multiple rereads to even understand, what's going on. Things, things that are written are deceiving you or not quite telling you the truth. You have to read between every line to understand what's even happening. It is just a very complex, dense work. I don't want to talk about that work though. Instead, I want to talk about some middle school books. So, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my favorite series of all time was the middle school series Pendragon by DJ McHale. I read this entire 10-book series multiple times. In fact, you can see here on my shelf, this is my little middle school books that I had from childhood. I've got all 10 books right here, right alongside like the Edge Chronicles. That was another middle school series that I loved. I read both of those series multiple times, but Pendragon definitely had a special place in my heart. And so this year, I grabbed these books back from when I visited my home, because I had all these books stored, and I was like, you know what? This year, I'm going to reread Pendragon, and I want to ask the question: does Pendragon hold up? So I've reread the first three books of the Pendragon series: The Merchant of Death, Lost City of Far, and The Never War, and that's what I want to talk about today. So, if you don't know, Pendragon is the story of this 14-year-old kid, Bobby Pendragon, who gets involved in basically this huge intergalactic adventure spanning multiple dimensions and worlds. He learns that he's a traveler, which is like this cool sci-fi adventurer savior type who hops around to different dimensions, different worlds, and saves each of them from like a breaking point. So each of the different worlds that Pendragon visits are on the brink of some kind of destruction, extinction level event, some kind of turning point. And whether that is destruction, either like literally like death, or like a turning point, like just society will crumble, or somebody will be oppressed, right? There's always some kind of turning point that's going to happen to these worlds. And Bobby, as a traveler, has to find these turning points and steer the world from the brink of ruin or destruction, and fix the turning point so it turns the right way, basically. So you have to save all these worlds. And there's like a whole other layer of this, right? So there's like a main villain who is trying to do the opposite of Bobby and the Travelers. He's trying to turn all the worlds, right, to destruction. And so every book is like this race against time, where we have to find out we have to discover this new world, we have to figure out how the world works, and then we have to figure out what the turning point of the world is, and then stop the villain, Saint Dane, from destroying the world. So does book one, The Merchant of Death, hold up? That is an interesting question. To be honest, when I was in middle school, even though I read all these books, and I obviously enjoyed the first book the first time through because I read the entire series, and even though I've read all these books multiple times from middle school to high school, the first one was never my favorite ever. It was never even one of my favorites, to be honest. And honestly, I think the same holds true. I think the first book is not bad, but it's pretty weak. It's pretty average. Like, if we were to use modern slang, it would be pretty mid, as the kids say. I think probably McHale was so focused on getting the world building, establishing the formula, and what the series is even about, like getting all the concepts across. And so, because we're focused so much on explaining, here's the arc of the series, here's the concepts, here's the world building, that things like, the characters and their relationships, or the actual adventure on Denderon, are just not quite as exciting to me. Before I get into books 1 through 3, this retrospective is going to be full spoilers. I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you've probably already read Pendragon, so we're going to talk about the full spoilers throughout the series, because I don't know how else to talk about these. So in book 1, obviously, Bobby Pendragon is recruited by his Uncle Press, learns that he's a traveler, is brought to this medieval, in quotes, world of Denderon, and he's taught what a traveler is, what a traveler has to do, and then the gang has to bring Denderon back from the brink of destruction, because there are these two factions, this oppressed tribe and this military powerhouse, and they are soon about to go at war, because the oppressed tribe has basically discovered this new, almost nuclear explosive technology that they're going to try to use to wipe out their enemies. And so Bobby and the gang have to figure out a way to make peace between these two factions. Like I said, I think The Merchant of Death is so focused on establishing the mechanics and the formula and the story for the series at large that I think the actual adventure on Denderon itself is just kind of lame, and it's just kind of eh. And I think it gets down to the fact that, unlike a lot of the other books in the series, in fact, I'm trying to think, I haven't reread books 4 through 10 yet, but if I remember correctly, I think when you get to basically all the other worlds, Bobby spends a lot of time on those worlds, and gets to know the people there and the world there and the situation. And in the Merchant of Death, it takes place over the course of basically a weekend, like 2 or 3 days at most. I'm pretty sure. Bobby is here at Denderon for 3 days, and so I think that choice to me is kind of what makes book one weaker, because I just don't buy that Bobby changes the way he does in this first book in the span of 3 days. I know he sees some traumatic things, and I know that would change a person, but I just don't quite buy that this character would change and step up the way he does by the end of basically day 2 or 3. Now, obviously, he doesn't fully accept to become a traveler at the end, because he thinks his work is done at the end of the first book, and then obviously he gets back home and his home has disappeared, and that's really when he realizes, well, I have no other option. But even still, I don't know. There's just something about the short 3-day window that doesn't quite buy it for me. But another problem of the short 3-day window of this book is that all the character development to me feels just really rushed. Not just Bobby, like everyone. Specifically, I'm thinking of the traveler on Denderon, Alder, who is basically like a nothing character. Like this is the this guy. He's the traveler of his home world, and his world is on the brink of destruction. And also, what's really fascinating about his character is that he is not a member of the oppressed tribe. He's a member of the Order of Knights. So he's part of the oppressors, and he's just now realized that he needs to help these people. So much there with that character that you could do. But Alder is like a nothing burger. He doesn't do anything, barely. He has a fun introduction, and he's kind of part of the adventure, but there's nothing really that ever happens with him ever. And as far as I remember, he's one of those travelers that like never makes an impact on the series at large. Like I could think off the top of my head many characters, even though I haven't read these books in over a decade, that I could still remember. Like Spader is a character that Spader and Gunny and Aja, like all those characters definitely, like I remember those characters. You know what I mean? And Alder, sorry, like does not, like he just doesn't enter my head at all. So I think that's like a real shame. Now, there's still some cool things, right, in book one. In fact, I'd like to enter into a complimentary phase. Firstly, I like the twist that the world of Denderon is not quite medieval, because you're introduced to this oppressed tribe, and they're basically being kept in the Stone Age. And then you get to the Knight's Castle, and they have like technology and stuff there. That's not just a cool twist, but it's a cool bit of world building, and it's an added layer that gets you invested in the conflict between these two, because look at all these things that the oppressors are keeping from the tribe. Like they've got full-on technology that they can give to these people, and they're not doing it. I like that a little bit. But not just the world building on Denderon. And this is going to be a theme you're going to see throughout the whole series. But I love how there's always, the world building is always fun in Pendragon, because you're always having the individual territories that Bobby's going to. And so you're getting the world building for those different places. But there's also the world building at large, right? The Flumes and the Acolytes and the Travelers and the Cosmos, and what are the Travelers? What is Hala? What is Saint Dane? Why is he evil? Like there's the individual book world building, and then there's always the large scale world building. That's really cool. But now that we're kind of here at the end of my book one retrospective, I want to talk about my favorite thing of book one. And to be honest, it's my favorite thing of the entire series. And I had never encountered this before at this point in my life. I love the first person narration in the series. If you don't know the gimmick, right, if you're just watching a random video on a middle school book series that you've never read before, the series, like 50-60% of the series, is written in first person from the main character's point of view, Bobby Pendragon. Now, it's not just a regular first person narration, right, like something in The Hunger Games. The gimmick here, the framing device, is that Bobby, as part of his traveler duties, has to write down his adventures in a journal and send it to someone, both as like record keeping, as for him to like order his thoughts, whatever. So the first person narration you get here is not just a regular first person narration. You're reading the journals that Bobby has written, which is already cool, right? Because one, Bobby's a 14-year-old kid, and he comes from a certain time. And the narration, what I love about this is it sounds like it is written by a 14-year-old kid. And what I like about this is it helps the books hold up a lot more on rereads in some instances, because some of the writing being juvenile and some of the narration being a little immature makes sense for Bobby's character because he's 14 years old. This is how a kid would write. And I find that really cool and really realistic. The first person narration adds to his character. oftentimes while he's narrating, he'll pause and he'll make these weird tangents or subpoints or relations to things that a 14-year-old kid would make. You know, he'll see something and be like, you know, oh man, this reminds me of that cheeseburger I ate back at home, or oh, you know, seeing that, you know, that pet, it makes me miss my old dog. Just like how he'll interject things, or you know, how he'll think about things really immaturely, right? So like I saw a lot of, for instance, in this book, one of the main villains is this big obese woman, and I saw a lot of reviews online back when I reread this, people saying like, oh, this is fat shaming and stuff like that. But like, see, that doesn't bother me because Bobby's an immature 14-year-old kid. You know what I mean? So like he's gonna see somebody who's bigger and he's gonna be like, yeah, she was fat and gross, because that's what 14-year-old boys, you know, that's just kind of that's how they talk, right? So like all that is cool, right? Like both in the negative elements of immaturity and in, you know, the very interesting elements that comes about from that. The writing style informs you of the kind of guy that Bobby is. And so like the first person, even though you're like, yeah, it's like it's a younger book and it's not written super great, it's like fine, because well, he's 14, like he's not going to come out here and write The Name of the Wind, you know, in his narration, obviously. But there's an extra layer of this, right? Because it's not just that you're reading his journal, it's that you're reading his journal that he's writing to his best friend. It's not just, oh, it's not like the Book of the New Sun where Severian is like, yeah, I've written this manuscript, I don't know who's going to read it. This is the main character writing specifically to another character in world. And that brings a whole other layer of fun, right? So when Bobby's talking to the reader, he's not talking to you. He's talking to his best friend, Mark. And there's like allusions to him and Mark's past friendships and stuff that Bobby can write about, because, you know, that's the kind of thing you would do if you're writing a letter to your friend. Like it's almost like you're writing these just really long letters to a best friend. So there's almost an element of, you feel like you're almost intruding a little bit because this isn't for you, right? You're reading what's meant for Mark, and then eventually Mark and Courtney. And I just think that's cool that like Bobby will talk straight to Mark and Courtney. There's this part later in the series after Bobby has kissed Lore, who becomes kind of a love interest later, where Bobby, you know, you can tell he's really nervous about writing this part of the story because he knows Courtney's going to read it. And so like the way it's written, and you know, this is all the way in book 6, so we'll get to there and we get that. But I just remember that being really cool, the way Bobby is writing to these characters. That is just really interesting. So I had never seen first person used like that before. And in fact, this is what I love about this, is something I really want to compliment, is that I think the first sentence of this book is great, because I think it establishes all of this in the first line. The first line of the book is, I hope you're reading this, Mark. And for me, that was great because it established, one, this is first person, but two, this isn't just like, you know, where's this first person coming from? This is coming from the main character who's writing this, but also he's writing this for somebody else that I don't know. And I hope you're reading this, Mark. I think it's all that across. Like I think the best part, and I know this sounds really lame, but the best part of book 1 is the first line. I think it's a great first line. It hooks you when you're reading it, especially if, you know, if you were younger like I was, and you're just like, there's just so many questions there, right? And then as the first page goes on, I love how this is just another element of how good the writing style is from a 14-year-old kid's point of view, but the fact that Bobby's been through all this crazy cosmic adventuring, and the first thing he wants to write about to his best friend is the fact that he kissed his crush, and then he spends the first 5 pages talking about how he kissed his crush. That's just great, right? That's just great character writing. I love that. Another fun element is that you will also get third-person POVs from Mark and Courtney, because there's this running subplot throughout the entire series of Mark and Courtney receiving the journals, reading them, figuring out what's going on with Bobby, maybe helping him, maybe becoming acolytes, doing all these things, and then eventually they'll get roped into the A plot. I'm just gonna be honest. I think as I was rereading these, I think McHale didn't quite know what to do with Mark and Courtney. I think including them as third-person POVs is a great idea, but I think for these first couple books, they're obviously going to become hugely important later in the series. But right now, I think their chapters suffer the most on reread, because especially in these first couple books, it's usually just, all right, you finish the journal, and now you need to have an interlude chapter where Mark goes to school and always gets a new journal at the most inconvenient time, and wacky hijinks with the ring, and it's just kind of like whatever. And you know, by the end of book 3 and 4, they're doing some stuff, like they're trying to become acolytes and all these things, and you know, that's fine. But I think Mark and Courtney suffer the most in the first couple books on the reread. I just don't think their chapters were super interesting. Now, their chapters weren't interesting, but I do love the characters of Mark and Courtney. I think they're both very interesting characters. I love both of them. I think when I think back on Pendragon, like Mark and Courtney are characters I think about a lot. In fact, I love the storyline Courtney is going to go on later, starting around like book 4 or 5, I can't remember, where she ends up, she has this kind of downfall. And I will say, at least that the storyline with Mark and Saint Dane is obviously established very early on in book one. I'm interested to know if that was planned from the beginning with Mikhail. Probably it was, but at least any chapters with Andy are more interesting to read, book one this time around. All right, so yeah, that was book one. Does it hold up? It does. I think the writing style is there. I think the world building is there. I think the characters are there. But I think the actual mainline adventure of this one on Denderon, the Merchant of Death storyline, if you will, I think is kind of mid, and it kind of suffers, and it's not my favorite. Yeah, like it is okay, right? It was never my favorite on the first read, and I think it kind of stays right there. Like it is an okay book with a lot of great things going for it. Book two, however, whew, now we're cooking with gas, baby. Book two of The Lost City of Far was always one of my most favorites. So does book two hold up? Heck yes, book two holds up. Book two is great. In fact, this is actually my original copy. You can see like the super yellow pages, and the spine is just completely ruined because I read this. I'm not even kidding you guys. I read this book probably like 10, 15 times when I was younger. So The Lost City of Far, immediately we're getting into book two. We've established the formula, we've established the stakes, we've established the storylines, and book two can basically hit the ground running because we don't really have to explain anything. We can get straight into the new adventure. And that's one of the reasons I love book two. One of the second reasons I love book two is the world that they go to in book two is my favorite territory in the entire series, bar none. Chloral is so cool, and I want to go there so bad. And I am so jealous that it doesn't exist in real life. In fact, if you were to ask me, did James Cameron basically rip off Chloral in his movie Avatar: The Way of Water, I would tell you absolutely yes. Definitely James Cameron made The Way of Water because he read The Lost City of Far, and he went, I want to copy that for my book. One of the reasons I like The Way of Water movie is because it reminds me so much of Chloral, which I know is like a really dumb reason. I don't know if anybody else made that felt the same, but that's when I watch Avatar: The Way of Water, I'm like, bro, that's literally Chloral. It's from Pendragon. So Chloral is this like water world. It's this aquatic world. It's completely covered in water. And like the whole world is basically like this big ocean, and the cities are made on these like floating ginormous ships, island-sized habitats. The technology of Chloral is so cool. All these water gadgets that the characters have in this book are great. Like Chloral, just like even to this day when I was rereading this book, it just sparks my imagination, man. Like I just want to go there so bad. You know, when you read an alternate world, a fantasy world, and you're like, you feel sad because you want to be there. That's how I feel about Chloral. I want to go there so badly. I know I've said that for the past 5 minutes that I want to go to Chloral, but Chloral is great. The world building on Chloral, like the different technology and characters, the way society works there, the mythology that you get into in this book is pretty fun. Like there's like a nice little riff on Atlantis, which is a good time. I just like the water stuff, man. I want to put on the air globe and jet ski around with the little, like I can't remember what they're called, the little skimmers or whatever. Like I just want to do that. But not only is the world building way cooler on in this one with Chloral, but the characters are way better. So already we solved my first issue with the first book because Bobby spends a long time on Chloral, like almost a year, I think. He spends several months before like the big events go down. So I can't remember exactly how long it was because I reread this back in like January when I was reading Atlas Shrugged. So yeah, he spends a long time there. So because he spends a long time there, Bobby can describe the world of Chloral in much more detail to you because he gets to explore. He gets to do all these things. And because he gets to do all these things, you become attached to the world of Chloral. Because you like it so much, because Bobby likes it so much, you don't want it to fall, right? And so you're already way more emotionally invested because it's just a cooler world and you like it and you like the people there, because that's the other thing that this book solves. The secondary characters that are introduced in this one are great. Spader is one of the best characters in the entire series, and he's introduced in book 2, and he's going to go on to be like a great character throughout the series, and it starts here. Spader's great. He's this really fun character, and from the get-go, he's this like he's like the what is it? Like I said, it's been a couple months now, but he's like this. Basically, he's kind of like this Marine soldier type, but he's just really fun and really confident. He's not very serious, and that already makes it fun. And there's just this added wrinkle at the beginning of the book where Spader is supposed to be the Traveler, but Spader doesn't know yet, and so Bobby has to initiate Spader into the Travelers, which is something that he was only initiated in last book, and he doesn't even really know what it's all about. And that gets you gets you invested in Bobby as a traveler more. It gets you invested in Spader as a traveler more, especially because you know that Spader's going to go through tragedy like Bobby's going to had went through tragedy in the last book, and you don't want him to suffer anything because Spader's a cool, fun character. So Spader's great. All the side characters in this one are great. The world building is great. Like just everything about this is great. It's still short, like the first book. So honestly, there's like a month-long montage that does a lot of heavy lifting at the beginning of this one, and then once the adventure starts, it's kind of like book one and it's just like a couple days and it goes straight to the end. But even just adding a chapter or two of here are these stuff we did for several months on Chloral really does so much heavy lifting for the book. But also just fleshing out the character that's not Bobby, like Spader, means you'll always remember Spader, unlike Alder. This one is great. I think the finale is a lot more fun because there's like a whole Atlantis thing going on. I think the adventure is a lot more fun. I just think everything about this one is a lot more fun. The only thing I don't like about this book is Mark and Courtney's storyline is not only kind of whatever. I mean, it sets up more, especially when you reread, you know that Saint Dane is messing with Mark and Courtney. The only thing is it does that annoying thing in books where it like hides information from you to ratchet up tension, but then by the time the tension resolves, the answer was, oh yeah, we solved this chapters ago, but we didn't tell you, the reader. And like there's this whole tension where Mark has gotten into this thing with Andy, and Andy's stolen Bobby's journals, and he's going to bring it to the police. And Mark is like, oh no, I've broken Courtney's trust, and I have to tell her, and all this stuff. And the book makes it seem like, oh, Courtney's going to see this as a big betrayal. But then by the time you get to the resolution, it's like, oh, Mark told her off screen, and they made this whole solution to circumvent the whole conflict, and we didn't tell you. And that's a trope that I really don't like in anything, and I don't like that they use it here. But otherwise, honestly, book two lives up to the version. After rereading book one, I was really nervous to reread this because this one was my favorite. And no, it's still great. It's still a lot of fun. And if for anything, you should read this one just for Chloral, to be honest. Like, man. And also, I like that this one does the killing off the mentor trope, but it does it super early in the series. Normally I think when you think of killing off the mentor, you've got to do it like after the main character has basically learned everything they can from the mentor, usually. And so now you just need them for like motivation or whatever. But this one, Uncle Press is killed off before Bobby really knows anything about what's going on in the series. And from here on, this adds an extra tension to the series where you always feel like Bobby is super outclassed in whatever venture he's going to go on because he knows kind of what he has to do. But to be like 15 years old and then suddenly to be thrust into the role of main honcho traveler, I just think it's cool that McHale had the balls to do that in literally book two, because there's 8 more books. And now Bobby has to figure out all this stuff out on his own. And I just like that Bobby didn't really learn a ton from Uncle Press, and now he's thrust into this role. And I just think that's cool. Like very early on, Bobby is thrust into like a leadership role and how he initiates Spader and how he deals with Uncle Press's death. That I think makes Bobby a much more interesting character very quickly. So does book two hold up? Heck yes. The Lost City Far definitely holds up. Finally, book 3, The Never War. This concludes what I consider like the beginning arc of the series. The beginning arc of the series for me is books 1 through 3. These are the shortest books. I read each of these books basically in like a day, 2 days. They're very short. They're very breezy reads. And I actually bought a new copy, hardcover for this one. So this one's brand new. Very nice. Eventually I'll replace book 2, but I don't know, there's something special about my original copy of this one that I don't necessarily want to get rid of. All right, book 3. So in my initial read of this when I was younger, book 3 was also another one that was never one of my favorites. That being said, even back then, book 3 had some of my favorite elements, if that makes sense. Some of my favorite individual elements, but as like a book, it was never my favorite. So book 3 takes place in 1930s in First Earth, which, as an aside, this is something I've been thinking about since I was 10 years old. How does First, Second, and Earth work? Because when you read it, the vibe you get is, oh, of course, like First Earth is the 1930s, Second Earth is modern day, Third Earth is the future. But time passes, so will First Earth eventually hit like what we would consider modern day, like the 2000s, and Second Earth will be like 2200 or whatever, and Third Earth is. Does this make sense what I'm saying? How does time passing between the 3 Earths work? Do they all progress linearly? And eventually First Earth will be at the same time as Third Earth, and Third Earth will be thousands of years in the future? I want to know, does McHale have an answer for this? Or is there just some timey-wimey thing where somehow First Earth is always 1930s and Second Earth is always 2000s? Mikhail, explain yourself. How do the three Earths work with time passing in each of the three worlds? I don't understand that. Book 3 on the reread, does it hold up? Honestly, yeah, this book was a lot better than I remembered it. And that a lot of that comes down to the fact that the premise of this book is kind of insane for a middle school book. Basically, the plot of this book is Bobby travels to the 1930s, meets another fan favorite character for me, by the way. I don't know why I said fan favorite. I'm the one fan that I know of. It meets one of my favorite characters, Gunny, who is this like old, like 70-year-old man from the 1930s who's like this butler at this hotel. And he is just super suave and super cool. I love Gunny. Love Gunny. He's so much fun. And I like how different each of the travelers has been so far. Like you've got this medieval knight, you've got this water marine soldier captain, and then you've got this 70-year-old butler, like just a totally normal guy. That's really cool. The world building, if you can call it that, is just 1930s, New York. So if you want a nice little history lesson, this is a cool book. I feel like this taught me a lot about the 1930s, and something that lives in my head rent free is the fact that back then they used tooth powder instead of toothpaste. I think about that all the time for some reason. I don't know how you guys did that back in the 30s. It's really freaking weird. But the premise of this one, the Hindenburg is going to crash soon, and Bobby St. Dane wants to stop the Hindenburg from crashing, because if the Hindenburg doesn't crash through various means, World War III is going to happen and the world is going to become a nuclear hellscape. And Bobby has to make sure that he destroys the Hindenburg so it catches on fire and everybody in the Hindenburg dies. Because if everybody in the Hindenburg doesn't die, then, worse things will happen in the world. Classic butterfly effect. Now, that might sound normal to you or me because we've totally seen stories like that before, but to like a 10-year-old, this is a crazy premise. And just rereading this, I was shocked that they allowed this in a middle school book, because this is a crazy, because when you get to the second half of the book and you realize this is what has to happen, Bobby, this 15-year-old kid, spends like the remaining half of the book wrestling with this moral dilemma about having to cause the deaths of these people in this horrific accident to save others. And it's really heavy stuff. When you get to the finale of this book and Bobby is trying to stop Spader from saving the Hindenburg, and then Bobby can't do it either, and Gunny has to step in and stop them from doing it, like he takes that on himself, is just like, even to this day, like rereading it, I just thought that whole resolution was really heavy and just really, it was like hard to read. I mean, like, what is that? Having to wrestle with something like that when you're 15 years old is crazy. And not just that, but like he fails to do it too. That's the other thing. So like he can't, like Bobby literally, you get to the end, Bobby can't do it. He can't kill these people. And so it's, it makes him more relatable. It makes him more likable. You understand why he's struggling with that, but also it adds another level of another layer to Bobby's character going into book 4, because Bobby now knows that St. Dane has beat him. Like St. Dane was right, that Bobby couldn't do this. And there's more stuff going on in the book. Like there's like a gang war, and there's whole things with these gangsters, and all that stuff is fine. It's fun. But like really, to me, this book kicks in when you get to the second half, and like the real moral dilemma is revealed, and you just get these characters wrestling with this conflict. And I just think that's really, I don't know, I just love that. I love Gunny as a character. I love Spader in this book, because Spader is basically like Ellie from The Last of Us 2, and is like gung-ho, wants to kill St. Dane, and is so blinded by his hatred of St. Dane that he almost destroys the three Earths by saving the Hindenburg. Gunny, like I said, is a great character, because I think he's a war vet, if I remember correctly, but now he's like this butler at this hotel, and he's just this cool, suave 70-year-old dude, and you just love him. I just love Gunny so much, and I don't know if I can't remember if he ever comes back. I know he starts his quest with Bobby at the beginning of book 4, if I remember correctly, but I don't remember where else Gunny shows up. But Gunny is one of my favorite travelers. Gunny and Spader are two characters that I actually think about all this time, 10 years later, as characters that I loved back when I read this. Unlike the other books, because of timey-wimey stuff, but all the journals that Bobby's written in this adventure go to Mark and Courtney at once. And so there's not really a lot of Mark and Courtney breaks in this one. You mostly get the full, like just the straight story. And so that sets this apart from the others. There's not a lot of Mark and Courtney interludes. This is basically just the straight adventure with Bobby. And then and this one also, Bobby gets to actually have some time with Mark and Courtney at the end, and I really liked that ending bit. That you basically get the straight adventure, and then you get this fun little break where Bobby resets and has time with Mark and Courtney, which was really wholesome, you know, and it's like a nice little break at the end before he goes back into his adventure. And this one, you've also got Bobby is just a better character because he's dealing with the death of Uncle Press, just like Spader's dealing with the death of his father. So there's just a lot of good character stuff in this one, and a cool premise in this one. The beginning of the plot is fine, like the first half with the gangsters and stuff. Honestly, I could take it or leave it. It's whatever. But it's cool to be in 1930s. It's cool to time travel. The characters are great. The moral dilemma is great. The second half is a lot of fun because it's very urgent, you know. And just by the end of it, I felt like it was pretty harrowing to read that ending section with the Hindenburg, and this was written for 11-year-olds. So, I mean, this is crazy. This is like, I just think about it. I guess this book just blew my mind. Like, I respect this book, and I just think about like, wow, I can't believe I read that when I was like 10, because this is like crazy for like a kid to reckon with. And what's crazy is when I was 10, this didn't even bother me. I was just like, oh yeah, that's cool. And now I look back and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy that McHale wrote this. It's crazy that I read it. It's crazy that I didn't even register it as weird. But like, it's pretty heavy stuff, honestly, for a young kid. Also, I forgot that you get to see Third Earth in this one, and that's really cool. That's probably one of the lame things about the series, is that you never really get Third Earth in the series, because by the time you get to book 10, which is technically the Third Earth book, it's like a post-apocalypse deal. So you never really get an adventure in this version of Third Earth. This is basically what you're going to get of Third Earth throughout the series. So enjoy the couple chapters there while it lasts. So does book 3 hold up? Yeah, I think book 3 holds up pretty good. I liked it a lot more on this reread, especially the second half, more than the first half. Yeah, book 3, I think definitely holds up. All right, so that is the first 3 books of the Pendragon series, the first 3 books down in my Pendragon retrospective. Sometime soon, I'm going to pick the series back up at book 4, and I think probably from here on out, I'm probably going to do a video for each book, because these 3 were so short. I felt like I could do all 3 of these in one go. And I also think of these 3 as like, basically, in my opinion, the first 3 are kind of like the first major arc. And so the 3 kind of go together in my head. And do they hold up? Book 1, not as much, honestly. Book 1 is fine with potential sprinkled throughout. And books 2 and 3, I think you start to see that potential realized. Now, besides book 2, I don't think books 3 or books 1 are all wall-to-wall bangers, right? Like the rest of the series, in my head, you know, from when I was a kid, we'll get. But I think as a whole, these 3 hold up pretty well, to be honest, and I really enjoy it. When you look back at what the series has going for it, the framing device, the character work, the crazy, weird world building, all that stuff is still as fun as ever, and I'm enjoying it as much as I did when I was younger. I'm getting more out of these on a reread. And as a tease, the next book, book 4, The Reality Bug, might have been either my most favorite or my second favorite on my first time reading through. So I'm really excited to get back to The Reality Bug. I do think about The Reality Bug to this day, still, actually, as one of my favorite reads. So that'll be fun to see if it holds up, you know, all this time later. We'll see. But until then, see ya.